James Inglis Reid was my maternal grandfather, and he was born in 1874 in the small village of Waterside, which is in the parish of Culinary, near Glasgow. He was one of 6 children and grew up in a household of very modest means. The dream that fueled his desire to come to Canada was to establish his own grocery store, or a provisions store, as he called it. He departed from Glasgow in late March of 1906. He arrived in Halifax, where many immigrants arrived. He looked around on Vancouver Island, and he also looked at Seattle. But one night he sailed into Vancouver Harbor at sunset and decided Vancouver was for him. But, that's the family story. So he arrived in 1906 at a very auspicious time in the city. The city was doing very well, had good luck in that regard. And in May 1908 opened his first store on Westminster Avenue, which became Main Street. He was at that location for several years, then moved to Harris Street, which is now East Georgia Street. Then he heard that opportunities were very good in the Granville Street area. So he moved to rented premises at 559 Granville Street. And in 1922, he was the owner of 559 Granville Street, and that's where the store remained until it closed in 1986. He chose to focus on curing bacon and ham, and that may have been because only the English outnumbered the Scots in Vancouver. There were large numbers of Scots, and they were looking for tastes of home. They had a ham curing and bacon curing operation in the cellar, huge coolers and a smokehouse. Then on the 3rd floor, there was a bakery and what became known as the sausage kitchen. In the bakery, Scottish meat pies, as well as Scottish things like oatcakes, pancakes, potato scones, all sorts of baked goods. And it was in the sausage kitchen that they made, of course, sausages, but also haggis, black pudding, white pudding. And he always advertised the business, and throughout all of the years that it was in existence, on the business cards, the letterhead, it was always ham curers and provision merchants. It was never butchers. James Inglis Reid Ltd was more than a butcher shop. It was also a gathering place for people in the Scottish community, and also those came from other places in the United Kingdom. They were a large part of Vancouver's history, and certainly a lot of the success of the business, I think, particularly in the initial years, was the fact that the Scottish community supported it. And Reid's was a major producer of haggis. They made haggis year-round, but the main production time was in January for Robbie Burns Day. He filled many, many orders for Burns dinners and St. Andrew's Day balls. And his production of haggis was known in Vancouver, but throughout British Columbia, elsewhere in Canada, and particularly on the west coast of the United States. When James Reid decided that he needed a canopy over the front of the store, he chose to put as one of the slogans on this canopy the words, "We hae meat that ye can eat." This was in 1933. So he took these words from Robert Burns's Selkirk Grace. At least the grace is attributed to Burns, but probably not written by him. And the 3rd line says, "We hae meat and we can eat." So he changed it to "We hae meat that ye can eat," and it became the main slogan of the business. I think it really gave some meaning for particularly Scottish people when they read the words. As one Scot who grew up in Vancouver said to me, I knew the language of Scotland from my home. We were from Scotland. And when I went by and looked at "We hae meat that ye can eat," I read it, but I also heard the words, and it brought back memories. James Reid, in the early 1940s, began to realize that he would not be able to work in the business for that much longer. So he approached his son-in-law, my father, Gordon Wyness. My father managed the business from 1945 until 1986 and was a major contributor to its success over those years. the decision came to close the store, the amount of comments from customers and also the attention in the press made my parents and I realize that there was something worthy of preserving related to this business. And we realized that generations of people in Vancouver had shopped at the store. So it seemed natural to approach the Museum of Vancouver and ask if they would be interested in any of the objects. And probably key objects that came to the museum were the outside windows, and one of them is in the display behind me. So along with those rather large objects were many smaller items like sausage stuffer, smokehouse racks, and many of the shop signs that were used on the counters and in the windows. In addition to the objects that were donated to the museum, we also donated many of the paper records to the City of Vancouver Archives. There's 60 years of sausage kitchen records. Every year you know exactly how much haggis, black pudding, white pudding, sausages, etc. were made. It's a huge volume. There's record books going back to 1919, and it's not that usual to have a small business record over that period of time. You can certainly learn things about how the business coped, for example, during the First World War, during the Second World War, the Great Depression, and the changes that came with the redevelopment of downtown Vancouver, with the Granville Mall, and the construction of the Pacific Centre. I think I've always just thought that it was worth recording the history of this family business. These are important types of objects to preserve because they tell a story. I knew that it had been valued by many people in Vancouver. There's a lot of memory of the store.